Hi, I'm Chris from CodeReviewVideos.com, and in this video we're going to wrap up our untested approach by implementing wallpaper delete. And you can see that we've already got the delete functionality available. This comes with Easy Admin Bundle, but our problem is when we delete, the image file itself is not getting deleted. So just to quickly cover off what I mean by this, we're going to upload Solana Beach, give it any old slug, it doesn't really matter. And so that comes up, we get our preview and whatnot, and if we look inside, our images folder, Solana Beach is added. It's in red there because Git doesn't know about it. So the project is under Git, so it thinks it's a new file that's just not been tracked. Anyway, if we go to delete that, it should delete. But what happens is the underlying image file itself remains on disk, which is a problem because when we next go to upload a Solana Beach, say we made a mistake with it in some whatever way, or if we come back in the future and we found a new picture of Solana Beach but we've got exactly the same file name, we're going to hit upon a problem that the file already exists. So to begin with, I'll just delete that file and then we'll crack on with solving this problem. So we already actually know the solution to this problem. If we look inside our app in the config, under services, we have our wallpaper listener and we listen for pre-persist events, pre-update events, and these are dispatched by doctrine. Well, there's also a pre-remove event, so that's quite handy. And as you might expect, this gets called whenever an entity is about to go through a removal phase. Now, we don't actually control that because, as you saw, when you click this delete button, Easy Admin Bundle is going to take care behind the scenes of removing the entity. And so, because we use an Easy Admin Bundle, that actually sort of masks where this is going to get triggered. Normally in your own applications, you would call that yourself inside your controller action or similar. So much like we got pre-persist and pre-update, if we go to our wallpaper listener, what we're going to need to do is add in a new public function, which we're going to call pre-remove. And the pre-remove method is going to get a lifecycle event args instance passed in as its only argument. And again, we can do entity equals event args get entity. And critically, we also need to check if we're dealing with a wallpaper instance. Now, we could look at extracting this out into its own private method, but to be honest with you, if I do that, it's not really going to make the code any better. Sometimes you just can't avoid the duplication. So I'm also going to take this little doc block here, pop that in, and that's just going to make it a little bit easier as we work through it. So as we see, or as we have seen, should I say, as we've been through pre-update, pre-persist, if we're not dealing with a wallpaper, then we would have returned by now. So we know at this stage we are actually dealing with a wallpaper entity. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the file to be null. So that's not actually going to delete the file in any way. It's just going to do a little bit of tidy up on our wallpaper. So that's the easy part out of the way. The next step is a little bit more tricky, and that's the process of actually deleting the image. So we've been a little bit considerate and we've thought about situations where we might move all our images from local disk, maybe up to Amazon S3 or similar at a future point. So what we don't want to do now is hard code our image file deletion process to just deleting from disk. Instead, what we're going to do is abstract this concept out into its own service, which we'll just call the file deleter service or similar, and then we'll hand over to the file deleter service to do the specifics of the file delete. So let's jump inside our source directory, app bundle, under services. We'll create ourselves a new service, which I'm going to call the local file system file deleter. Okay, I'll just add in the basics here. So we're going to need access to the file system. So I'll just inject that. We'll use Symfony's file system component. And that's just alt return there to initialize the fields. Saves me a bit of typing. And then we'll have a public function here called delete, which we're going to need to take a path to the file that we want to delete. And then we're going to call on this file system, remove. And then, as it says, we can either pass in an array or a string or something that's traversable. Well, we'll just pass in a string as that makes the most sense. So we'll just say path to file. And we'll see where we get with that. I think there's already going to be a problem, as if we think this through, path to file is already going to need to know that it's on local disk. So perhaps we'd need another service to figure out the path to the image file, and then we pass that on to the local file system deleter. But we'll come back to that in a sec. Now that we actually have a local file system deleter, perhaps we could add that into our wallpaper listener. But again, this is flagging up a problem here, because if I now do, and I'm only tidying up like that, they're just putting it on new lines because we're running out of space a little bit. You don't need to do that. But what if I pop that in there and then pop in my variable name, then immediately we've tied our wallpaper listener to a very specific implementation of how files are going to be deleted. So that's not really what we want to do. Instead, it would be nicer here to use an interface, and then we can just say, actually, this is just going to be a file deleter. How those files get deleted is really, at this stage, or from the perspective of a wallpaper listener, is not really any of our concern. So we'll start off and we'll say file deleter.php, and we'll just add in the basics. And again, what I'll do is let's take a copy of that and get rid of the use statement, remove all that local file system stuff, and just set this to be an interface. Get rid of that extra space as well. Don't need any of the construct. And that should be good enough. So that's our interface. We're just going to say we have one public function on this interface. It's going to take a string, which is our path to a file. And that really should be good enough at this stage. Okay, and then inside our local file system file deleter, we're going to implement file deleter. We've got a little bit of an error here because we expect this to be set to a string. But aside from that, things are looking okay. So now we can jump back into our wallpaper listener, and we can get rid of the local file system file deleter and just set it to be the interface, a file deleter, which makes it a lot more generic. Set that to be a file deleter, alt and return on it, set up the property, and we should be good to go. And so now inside pre-remove, what we're going to do is we're going to say this file deleter delete, and then we need to pass in some path to the file. Now this is what I was saying a little bit earlier. Our local file system file deleter is expecting to be given the full path on disk, and we don't want that concept spilling out into our wallpaper listener. So for the moment, we'll just say we're going to get from the entity just the file name, and then inside our file deleter, inside our local file system file deleter, should I say, what we'll also do is we'll inject a string, which will be the file path on disk. So again, I'm just going to alt and return on that, set these fields up. And so inside the delete function, we're going to concatenate this file path and then a slash and then the path to the file. Now, of course, there are nicer ways of doing this. We might have a service that we inject here to figure out the path and so on. I don't want to go too sort of enterprisey and just make this like super abstract, crazy system. Sometimes it's easier just to go a little bit hard coded and come back at a later date and make it a little bit more abstract and configurable as needed. Like, don't go overkill. At least that's my approach to it. Only make it as complex as it needs to be, because as you can probably tell already, things can get quite complex, even when doing fairly basic stuff. So we'll add in here a new service definition. We'll say app service, local file system, file deleter, which is going to have the class app bundle service, local file system, file deleter. That takes two arguments. It takes the app file system, which is the file system component provided by Symfony, or the file system service, should I say. And then we're going to pass in a parameter here. And so let's have a look at what parameters we've got configured. Well, we've got nothing in our parameters YAML dist, nor in our parameters. So how have we done it for our other services then? Let's take a look. So we've just passed in a path to web images. That might be sufficient. It really depends, I suppose. The parameter is quite nice to use. So just looking at that, we've got this repeated once, twice. Yeah, I guess we could extract that out to be its own parameter. So we'll take a copy of that, we'll cut that out, and we'll pass this in as our wallpaper file path or similar. We'll need to come back and do that one in a sec. So go into parameters YAML dist, and we'll say wallpaper file path. So this is the default one that comes with a new installation of Symfony. So if other developers on your team or whatever spin up an instance of this project, they would get that set. And then in our actual parameters YAML dist, we will do exactly the same. Now, whether this will work into the future, say if we switch to Amazon S3 or whatever, again, it would really be a point that we'd need to consider at that point. But for the moment, it should be good enough to get us to where we need to be. So one sort of crazy thing that we're doing there is our wallpaper file path is a parameter. And if we look inside our parameters, inside our parameter, we have another parameter. Oh, that's the one that Symfony sort of provides by default. But yeah, parameters inside parameters, all good. Anyway, let's get rid of that and get rid of that. And then inside our wallpaper listener, we also have this file deleter that we've injected, but we've not told our service definition about. So our wallpaper listener needs to be given this service. Let's drop it down there. Command D to duplicate the line. Paste that in. And let's take a look at our project now. So let's give that a refresh. And I'm going to add a wallpaper in so that we can see this a little bit more easily, because these ones are named a little bit nice. We'll use space 1, whack in any old nonsense as the slug. So let's just check. Inside our images directory, we've got our space 1. Want to make sure that when we delete this now, it's gone. Delete. Yep, that's fairly awesome. So wallpaper set file expects to only ever be given an instance of uploaded file, but we're passing in null. So what we need to do potentially is either not null it or go into our entity, wallpaper, and go under set file, wherever we are, set file, uploaded file equals null, and that just allows us to pass in a null. And we can say that parameter actually is either an uploaded file or a null. And let's just check this. Yeah, so file itself isn't saved off to the database. If it was, then we would also need to set this to, e.g. nullable equals true, just to make sure that the database column for this particular property could accept a null as well, but we don't need to worry about that in this instance. So let's just refresh that and make sure it's not done anything untoward. So try again. And now we've deleted, which looks good. Let's check. Yeah, it's just gone. So there we go, that's file delete. And that pretty much wraps up the CRUD side of a wallpaper in an untested approach. All that really remains now is we're going to go through and repeat this process in a tested fashion, and then finally just add in a little bit of security at the end to wrap us up for the first phase of our wallpaper upload system.